Welcome to HTB, or How to Become, the podcast where careers start with a conversation. Each episode, we sit down with someone actually doing the job you're curious about, from trades to tech, healthcare to hands-on skilled work. You'll hear how they got started, what the day-to-day really looks like, what they earn, and what they wish they'd known before they began. Whether you're a student, a parent, or someone thinking about a career change, these real stories are here to help you figure out your next step. Let's jump into today's conversation and learn how to become, well, anything. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Bernard Peters. Today, we're sitting down with Duncan French, who's taking us into the cockpit of the world's most advanced fighter jet, the F-35. Only a select few ever earn the title of F-35 pilot. These are highly skilled officers trained in the most cutting-edge aviation technology. As of 2025, the average annual salary for an F-35 pilot is about $131,000, with top-earning fighter pilots in the U.S. military making up to $175,000. The journey here is rigorous. It takes at least a bachelor's degree, typically in science or engineering, a top academic record, and years of intensive flight training. Most candidates become commissioned officers through the Naval Academy, ROTC, or Officer Training School, progressing through flight school, survival training, and finally advanced F-35 training. The average pilot starts this journey in their early to mid-20s and can spend over a decade perfecting their skills before flying operational missions. Out of all military pilots, only a small percentage reach the F-35 program, making it one of the most prestigious roles in aviation. In this episode, we'll get an inside look at what it takes to become an F-35 pilot, the daily realities of life in the cockpit, and the qualities required to earn a seat in this elite squadron.
Duncan, I am really excited to have this conversation because as a kid, all I wanted to be was a fighter pilot. Life didn't turn out that way for me, but it was really cool to meet you. It was amazing to be able to come to your retirement ceremony and get up close, get on the flight line. It was all really cool.
My pleasure.
Thank you for taking time this morning to speak to me. What inspired young Duncan French to become a Marine Corps fixed-wing fighter pilot?
Yeah, so I would say, it started very early on. I got bit by the aviation bug, as I like to put it, before I can even remember.
Yeah.
I was, looking up at the sky, pointing at airplanes as a young kid, and very quickly, memorizing the names of all the airplanes. And I believe in large part that was due to the fact that my dad was a pilot as well. So he was a Marine fighter pilot in Vietnam. He flew F4s in the Marines in South Vietnam. And he was long out of the Marine Corps by the time my brothers and I were born, but we grew up around the pictures and the photos and the friends and the stories that were the initial inspiration. And for whatever reason, between my two brothers and I was the one that pursued aviation. And so that was the start of it. In high school, I, had to get over the fear of flying myself. But I ended up getting my pilot's license about 6 months after I got my driver's license. So very early on. And I had been in small airplanes with my dad growing up because he got out of the Marine Corps and then continued in general aviation. So it's kind of a gradual process. Got my pilot's license, flew through high school, a bit in college, and then my freshman year of college, as I was starting to think about what do I want to do during the summers, start thinking about career path. Marine Corps aviation became, kind of popped up as an option. I looked briefly at the other services and their aviation paths and careers, and those, I would say, I quickly ruled out just based on my understanding of the different services, which there are some nuances to them. But it was a gradual process where eventually in college, I then, signed up to go to boot camp, which I ended up spending 2 summers of boot camp. And then by the time I graduated college, I was then commissioned as an officer in the Marine Corps, a spot to eventually go to flight school.
Yeah, that's amazing. So Was your dad in Vietnam right from the beginning?
Time-wise,
Yeah.
he was 69 and 70.
Was that before they realized that they couldn't just rely on these long-range missiles and they had to relearn dogfighting?
So there was a fair bit of lessons had been learned at that point, albeit the Marine Corps was focused much more on supporting the Marines on the ground, vice going into North Vietnam to take on MiGs and missions into Hanoi and Haiphong. But I would say he was very heavily influenced by the first few years of the war, where classmates of his who were ahead of him, who ended up in helicopters, some of them were shot down, some of them were killed. And so there was much higher risk of going down the helicopter path.
Right.
And there was a very different motivation to get selected for jets, which is the more competitive pathway.
Yep.
So there were some different motivations, but as far as, the tactics are concerned, he was primarily dropping bombs in close proximity to friendly forces.
Now, you said you had to get over your own fear of flying as a kid. You had a fear of flying?
Well, I loved flying in airplanes.
Yeah.
There was a fear of flying myself.
Gotcha.
I mean, I definitely recall having the first conversation. I actually remember the image vividly next to the barbecue with my dad when we talked about it, and he extended the offer because I think at the time was about $6,000 to go through the whole process of getting the pilot's license. And he asked, hey, are you interested in doing this? And I remember feeling some apprehension because it's a bit nerve wracking to
For sure.
go and do something that's dangerous and it's the unknown. And I remember the fear of some of those first couple of flights, the first time flying in like weather that was more than just blue skies, the first time flying myself a couple times, practicing. You put yourself in situations where they're not out of control or dangerous, but out of the norm, and you practice getting the airplane back in a position where it's safe.
Right.
And to do that by yourself definitely takes a little bit of like, all right, I'm going to put myself at risk to train to get better. And I also have some memories there of like, there's some nerve-wracking moments.
I bet.
But you do it a couple times, you get comfortable with it, your confidence increases, and it then, compels you to do more of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what did you initially go to college for? Did you have this career path already in mind, or?
So I think I selected science pretty early on.
Yep.
Going into freshman year, because you do have to, not that you have to declare a major, but you do need to be somewhat specific with the field you go down. And that was before I had made the decision to like go to boot camp and pursue the Marine Corps. So they were very, very different.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I ended up pursuing effectively chemistry, oceanic atmospheric chemistry, and some of the atmospheric chemistry and understanding, how the atmosphere is built, if you will, applied to aviation. But beyond that, I haven't practiced any of it. It was, some pretty nerdy chemistry lab work.
Yep.
I did.
And then what made you decide to call a recruiter? And
part of it was the love of aviation and the fact that military aviation, in my opinion, is the pinnacle of aviation. Part of it was, I kind of needed a job over the summer. So after my freshman year is when I went to that first boot camp. And part of it was just like, the love of adventure and risk and doing something different. And so
for sure,
the combination of all of those is like, all right, yeah, let's give this a go. And I definitely was not convinced that I was going to go down the Marine Corps career path that first summer of boot camp. But when I came back, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm a changed person.
Yep.
Almost in some ways, like slightly not detrimental, but like fundamentally different about how I approached executive function and time management, discipline, physical exercise, things like that.
Yeah.
It was foundational. And that is what eventually was like, okay, I think I'm gonna try this out.
Yep. And so you said you explored some of the other branches of the military as well, but there were some nuances. So I think for aspiring aviators, what were the nuances? How did you see the different branches serving what you wanted to get out of it differently? What made you ultimately choose the Marine Corps?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess a couple aspects of it. One, the conversations when I started to realize, hey, I want to pursue aviation, I obviously, turned to my dad to talk to him about it. And at no point were my parents ever like pushing me in that
Yeah,
direction. They were
that's
always
great.
very supportive in making sure that I had all the information I needed to make the smart decision. But I also remember this conversation vividly in the backyard, talking about, what about Air Force military aviation? What about Navy aviation?
Right.
And I think my dad's comment was something to the effect of, "Oh, you're not doing that." Because as a former Marine aviator, he was like, "No, you want to go down the Marine Corps path," which they are quite different. The mission in general, when you talk about the jets piece of it, um, the Air Force is typically doing like larger strategic type stuff. The
Mhm.
Navy flies off of carriers almost exclusively.
Yep.
And the Marine Corps is much more tied into their ground forces. And so, in general, they have different mission sets. And with that, they have also very different cultures. And the Marine Corps culture, in my opinion, I don't regret the decision I made. The Marine Corps culture is the best of the three. It is much more, there's like kind of a holistic, like more officer, like you're a Marine officer
Mhm.
before you're a pilot.
Yep.
In the Air Force, you're a pilot,
Right.
I would argue, before you're an Air Force officer, which brings a mindset of more teamwork in the Marine Corps and a little bit more is maybe derogatory in the Air Force, but like more selfish, if you will. The Navy's kind of a blend of the two.
Mhm.
Um, so it was a combination, I think, of, influence from my dad, understanding to a degree what the culture was like, and, what options were available that made me pursue the Marine Corps path.
Yep.
Interesting, I would say that, for me, it was always like I wanted to go jets.
Yes.
Helicopters were not the interest in, the path that I want to pursue. And, I would say percentage wise, if you're playing the numbers game, the Marine Corps is probably not the right path, if that's what you want to do. It's about maybe a third of Marine pilots who enter flight school end up going jets. The other 2/3 end up going helicopters and C-130s.
Mhm.
And so I probably would have had higher percentage of getting jets in the other services, but the other factors outweighed that decision.
Right.
So those were really the primary ones that led me down the Marine Corps path. And like I said, as I've learned more about what the other services do, I don't regret, and I think it was the right call.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. Can you walk us through the process and milestones required to become a fixed wing aviator, and then B, work your way up, past F-18s to the F-35s?
So it was um, the Marine Corps. I guess every service has their own commissioning process to start from the very beginning. And commissioning is when you're commissioned as an officer.
Right.
Um, the Marine Corps' boot camp, if you will, it's slightly different terminology for officers,
Mm.
is different. It's more rigorous than the other services. In my case, I did 2 6-week summers of boot camp in college. There are a couple other options to get there, but it is so you commission as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. In my case, when I signed up before I was even commissioned, the contract that I signed guaranteed me a spot in flight school. And that is typically how most folks will go about the aviation path. So when they sign up, it's either um, the aviation path, the ground path, which includes all things
Mm.
um, on the ground, and then the lawyer path for
Gotcha.
the judge advocate generals or the JAGs. Um, So I knew I was going to aviation, but all Marine officers go to a 6-month officer training called the basic school, all in one place, where everyone, regardless of what you're going to do, learns how to be a infantry platoon commander.
Right.
And that gets everybody on the same page.
Right.
And that's the start of this like culture piece that I was talking about with the Marine Corps. So 6 months of that. Following that, you then go on to flight school, and depending on the aviation path that you go down, it's effectively like going to college again. I spent in total, I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years before I ended up in the operating forces. So 6 months of officer training, and then about 3 years of aviation, of flight school, to include learning how to fly that tactical aircraft, with some breaks in between. Took me about 4 years. So you initially start out in a primary trainer, which was a T-34 that has been retired, replaced with a T-6, but a single engine propeller driven aircraft that everyone does. And then folks stream into jets, helicopters, the transport C-130 path, and the Marines. And you then go on to an additional advanced trainer, which is the T-45. I flew the A. It is now a C. So it's changed over the years. The helicopters fly a version of like a jet Bell Ranger, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And the KC-130 path, they fly a King Air.
Yep.
You graduate flight school, and then you go on to then fly. You learn how to then fly the first tactical aircraft. And that was about process for me in the F-18. And at that point, you then enter the operating forces, and your first tour, which is effectively a 3-year stint, if you will, is then with an operating squadron that is capable of being deployed overseas for contingency, combat operations, depending on the situation. And then there are a lot of options beyond that, but that's generally their first kind of 6-7 years. And as you mentioned, in my case, I got selected for the F-18 path.
Mm-hmm.
The F-35 then came online, and I applied to transition and was selected to then transition in the F-35, and spent the latter half of my career doing that.
So a couple questions there. When you signed the contract with the Marine Corps that guaranteed you a slot in aviation school, did you have to first pass any kind of aptitude test or anything like that?
You bet. Yeah.
Okay.
So there was a battery of tests, both kind of mental aptitude as well as physical,
Yep.
to satisfy the requirements to get the aviation contract.
Gotcha.
And the physical piece, you can imagine, is, first and foremost, the eyesight piece. Like,
Right.
although there are some exceptions now for less than 20/20, and they accept and will even, allow for some vision correction, PRK, LASIK. One's allowed and one's not. I can't remember the exact details, but that's a big piece of it. Obviously, the physical fitness piece is applicable to everybody. And then interestingly, there's an aspect of like the dimensions of your body
For sure.
to have to fit in the cockpit.
Right.
So if you're too tall, for example, you may end up only being able to fly certain airplanes. So
Yeah.
I don't know that anyone was excluded from aviation because of their body. I will say, actually, if you're too small, that is one kicker. But very tall individuals may only be able to fly the C-130, for example.
Yeah.
In my case, I had my hip to knee length, I think, is maybe a bit longer than average. And so I was actually not able to fly at the time. The airplane's been retired, but the Prowler, based on the dimensions of the cockpit.
Wow.
So that's kind of the physical piece. In my case, what I had going for me was the fact that I had flown in high school, and I knew a lot about aviation. And so there's a spatial awareness test that is part of the mental, the academic aptitude portion of it. And I scored very highly on that.
Yeah.
Did very well. And that was in large part due to the experience I had as a prior pilot. And then there was some math and physics.
Yep.
I will say of note, there's an interesting one. I don't know if this was aviation specific or across the board, but it basically tested your level of aggression, for lack of a better term. And they're looking for individuals who aren't rash, but they also don't want people who are super risk averse either.
Yeah.
And so there were questions on there to the effect of like, do you speed? Like,
Yeah.
do you break the law?
Right.
And the right answer is yes.
Yeah.
They don't want somebody who is going to be a complete rule follower and, like I said, risk averse. And so
That is fascinating.
now, I admittedly going into the test, I had a little bit of an idea of what they were looking for, but
Yeah.
the right answer is a right blend in the middle there.
For sure. Yeah. Oh, that's
So
fascinating.
that was an interesting part of the aptitude test piece of it. But there was, bottom line, a fairly rigorous test. It is not a gimme, and
Yep.
I had a number of friends who did not pass and then went on to the basic school on a ground contract.
Yep.
Some of them tried to get back into aviation at that point.
Yep.
And I will say it's, as with a lot of things in the Marine Corps and the military, some of it is based on what you want to do. A lot of it is based on what the military needs.
For sure.
And so there's quotas and ratios of like how many people they need to go in certain pathways. And I saw a number of times through my career where people who were well qualified, maybe more qualified than somebody else, but their timing was just bad, want to do something and not get that opportunity.
And they just didn't have the need for it.
And others who were almost forced into doing something and maybe was even a more fortunate opportunity.
Yep.
For something they didn't even apply for sometimes.
That's life, though. I mean, I feel like, that happens, not just in career paths, but anything in life. It's,
No, you bet.
You have to have the right timing. Sometimes a little bit of luck goes a long way.
Yeah.
So could you have the option to take those aptitude tests and then if let's say you didn't qualify for aviation, could you then decide, okay, I'm not going to go through with this and I'm just going to continue on my university career?
There were definitely off ramps.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, I could have, the day of my commissioning, the day I had gold bars like pinned on my uniform, I could have said no. I could have walked away.
Yep.
After the tests, signing the contract, going to boot camp. So like I said, there's a number of different like pathways into the military. The path I took was very much to allow as many off ramps as possible. So I got paid to go to boot camp as if I were a sergeant was the pay rate that I got. So it wasn't a ton of money for 6 weeks, but it was effectively a summer job.
Yeah.
But there was no like obligation at that point. So I could have decided up until the very last moment that I didn't want to do it, which is unlike the two other main pathways, which is ROTC, where the government pays for you to go to school.
That was gonna be
and
my
then
next question.
There's the payback, right? Now, I think there are some off ramps there, but there's probably involves like financial reimbursement. And then the other big one's the Naval Academy, the military services, which for the Marine Corps, there's no academy. The Marine Corps officers come out of the Naval Academy.
Right.
Some come out of West Point, and some out of the Air Force Academy, but very few, like onesie, twosie. But that's the third commissioning source, if you will. And in that case, it's also very similar to ROTC. The government's paying you to go to school. You're getting a free education with an obligation of payback in the service coming out of the backside.
So you weren't in a position where they then paid for you to finish your school. Yeah.
No. Okay. I was very fortunate that I was not put in a situation where I had limited options. I kept as many doors open as possible up until.
Yeah. Where'd you end up doing your basic?
The basic school. Yeah. So all of that is in Quantico, Virginia. So all Marine officers go to one location.
Gotcha.
And the same thing with the boot camp. It's called Officer Candidate School.
So it's not out here in Pendleton for you.
So for the enlisted Marines, there are two locations, and that is the official boot camp, if you will. There's depot, or the recruit depot, which is here in San Diego next to the airport, and then Paris Island, which is the other well-known one in South Carolina. Those are the two sources for enlisted Marines, with obviously a much higher like demand requirement in terms of numbers, hence two locations. The officers, so the Marine Corps is about 180,000. It kind of fluctuates 180 to 200,000 over the years, and it's about a 1-to-10 ratio.
Yep. Okay, and so you said
officer to enlisted.
And you said 6 months there, so essentially split into 2 different summers.
So it was 2 different summers of boot camp, and then following commissioning, it was then 6 months in Quantico.
Gotcha.
For the basic school, TBS, which was all on site, weekends off, but pretty intense,
For sure.
period. Very much academic, with a heavy emphasis on the physical component, a lot of like time in the field, drilling, for, again, training to be an infantry officer. So learning urban combat and maneuvering through, terrain. It's wooded terrain there, so different than the desert, obviously, but a lot of, field craft, and then a heavy emphasis on the physical exercise piece of it. I mean, coming out of that was like the best physical shape I've ever been in my life.
Oh,
it was,
for sure.
Different days than now.
What skills or qualities helped you succeed through each of these stages to become an aviator?
Gosh, that's a good question. I guess on the physical exercise piece, the physical conditioning, that helped.
Yeah.
So having the background in athletics and hand-eye coordination and strength and endurance is very helpful.
Yep.
That's definitely, there's a big component of that to help manage stress, lack of sleep, the physical demands of the job.
Yep.
Early on, less so in aviation, but that was one. The mental, just cognitive aptitude piece is helpful, though not holistically across the Marine Corps, not as critical, I would say. I mean, there's a spot for everyone, effectively, in the Marine Corps. Admittedly, a lot of the smarter folks do end up going down the aviation pathway.
Yep.
So there's some of I guess those basic components, just the cognitive aptitude and the physical piece, and then into aviation, the skills to succeed. Discipline was a big part of it in flight school.
Yeah.
The discipline to stay focused. Really, there's a ton of preparation. I mean, like I said, it's like going to college again.
Yeah.
And so the study, chair flying, as we call it. So there's only so much time you can spend in the cockpit, right? And it's limited.
Expensive.
It's expensive, limited amount of time, and there's stressors that get added. And so there's limited opportunities to like think through what you're doing and then take action upon it, because things are happening quickly.
Interesting.
And so you need to be prepared for what, like procedures, for example, like, all right, I need to execute these 10 procedures in this order. I've got a checklist to back me up, but I'm going to have stressors and distractions, and I cannot screw this up.
Yeah.
So a lot of time you prepare for these events with what we call chair flying. And so you're, sitting in a chair, for example, looking through the checklist, you're putting yourself like mentally in the cockpit thinking, all right, I'm going to go through these 10 steps. This is where my hands are moving. These are what I'm going to see visually, and kind of mentally thinking through the process. So being good at that is very helpful. Admittedly, there's a lot of distractions too, where, flight school, interestingly, is in Pensacola, Florida, the initial piece, which has a lot of fun things to do.
Oh, for sure.
And a lot of, fun distractions. And a lot of my friends decided that their priorities were going out in town and not studying for their flight the next day. So that was a piece that helped as well.
Yeah.
I was, religious to a degree about my prep study. I would sign up for practice simulators, in order to prepare for flights ahead of time. And I honestly got to the point where I ended up teaching my friends, and I found that became a great way for me to learn, was to then, um, was to turn around and teach it, and then realize, oh, wait, I don't know this specifically because I'm unable to teach it very well.
Yeah.
So that was a big component of it. And then further on in training, there's aspects that became more important, one of which was compartmentalization and learning how to put aside fear. So I would say the most extreme example, because there were lesser examples along the way, but the most extreme example was landing on an aircraft carrier at night.
Yeah.
Which in flight school is probably one of the most difficult things that we do. And for a lot of folks, really for everybody, there's fear involved. And for a lot of folks, it's terrifying to the point where it interferes with your performance. Obviously, there's a fair bit of, screening here where folks are not good enough to do this and they don't continue.
Yep.
For me, what I found worked in my favor was I had a very strong ability to compartmentalize and put aside the fear and focus on the task at hand.
Mm-hmm.
And that then made me very good at the things that were, one, really scary.
Yeah.
And two, that required like intense mental acuity and focus, because I was able to shed load distractors.
Do you think that's a learned skill, or you think it's almost inherent, and then just through practice and repetition, you then, okay, I know what I need to do, so the fear is it's not as big a factor anymore. I'm going to just go through my checklist.
Yeah.
Here.
Great question. I don't know the answer specifically. I suspect it's a combination of, innate and your environment, and what you learn over time. So I think I was blessed the way I was built. My brain was built. I do think I'm probably wired a little bit differently, and that helped. Other aspects of it, I think, in my childhood and growing up helped. Again, going back to, like, I had maybe 100 hours of flight time going into flight school.
Right.
Which, when flight school is about 250 hours, that's a fair bit of experience to have under your belt. And then additionally, a couple of the sports that I undertook and activities growing up helped me to face fear. So I rock climbed and mountaineered a lot when I was in high school and college, and put myself, admittedly in some dumb situations that like terrified me, but coming out of it, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. But I think some of it's trained. Other aspects are probably, like I said, just part of who I am. There's a rock climbing movie, the name escapes me, where there's a solo climber who just goes and does these amazing rock climbing feats that are terrifying, that most people are not capable of.
Is it his, the free
I think that may be one where they talk about his amygdala being very small, which is your source of fear.
Yeah.
He is just wired differently.
Yeah.
And his fear producing gland, I don't know that amygdala is a gland, but that part of his body is like smaller than most people. And so I've never had it checked, but I've always wondered to a degree, like, does a small amygdala help when it comes to taking on tasks in military aviation that are terrifying?
Yeah, that's like your lizard brain.
Exactly. If you're able to like put those fears aside and focus on the task, it is very, very helpful.
I wonder if that's also something that changes, right? It's like if you feed that fear over time, your amygdala grows, or if you learn to compartmentalize it goes down. Oh, that's fascinating.
That's a great question. I don't know. Yeah. I'm not a brain scientist. I'm not even sure that's accurate.
You're just a fighter pilot.
I've always been kind of curious, though. And my wife jokes about that. She's convinced that my amygdala is very small.
Yes. So. Like I see you as somebody that doesn't really wear your heart on your sleeve, right? It's you manage your emotions very well. Yeah. Is that, do you think that's a good quality to have as an aviator?
Gosh, that is a whole separate conversation. because I mean, it has interplay with a number of aspects of
For
my
sure.
life. Part of that, I would say probably in large part was due to training in the military.
Yeah.
Because you're in a way, starting early on with boot camp, like I said, I was fundamentally changed by those first 6 weeks of my boot camp
Absolutely.
to put that aside.
Yep.
But then there's also an aspect of my personality as well that is
Tell the audience
a much more like, professional, outwardly emotive type
Yeah.
of personality is just kind of who I am.
Tell the audience what your call sign was.
So it went through a number of call signs that are all generally related to the subject of being like a robot and
Right.
not terribly emotive. I think the first one that was like it was Robo, and then it was Tron, as the movie Tron came out a number of years ago, that iteration. And then it ended up at GORT,
Right.
which stands for Genetically Organized Robotic Technology, after another movie as well about like a humanoid type robot character, initially from the 50s and then was redone about 15 years ago. So yeah, they've all all my call signs have revolved around that to a degree, which, it was somewhat helpful. I thought I probably not played it up more, but I focused more on it than maybe I should have, thinking it was going to be beneficial. And it was to a degree at times. But there's definitely an aspect of the military, like you need to be a human. You need to be approachable.
Yeah.
Especially as an instructor, you need to be approachable for your students to come to you to want to ask questions. And then, you as a military officer, and even more so in the Marines, you were in charge of people. I mean, one of my first jobs after being in the fleet, operational squadron for about a year or so, I then transitioned to be a division officer, and I was in charge of 40 Marines, from like 19 to, a couple were older, but call it 19 to like 22 young Marines. And I was 28 at the time, 29.
Wow.
And to not be approachable for these young Marines obviously is detrimental. So you need that. There needs to be some like interpersonal relations there. And so to be completely closed off and unemotive obviously is not helpful. So it was, I guess, a blessing and a curse to go or to play up. And I've learned over time to be more emotive and kind of internally break down some of those barriers. But, naturally that is kind of where I tend how I tend to come off.
Yep.
So it's taken some, kind of forced training, if you will, to be more human and approachable.
Yeah. Well, it was, I think there's an important aspect to that as well. If you're in a stressful situation, right, and you're in combat and you got to communicate with other people, you don't necessarily want to be screaming into the mic, right, into communications.
No, you're right. Yeah, you're right. There's a very important component to just being calm and collected under periods of stress, and people look to their leaders typically for that degree of being calm. That can be very helpful. And so that played in my favor.
That's awesome.
For sure.
All right. So let's fast forward to now you're an aviator, you're in F-18. What does the day-to-day look like?
Yeah. So gosh, day in the life for a Marine aviator and a tactical jet squadron. So it's certainly not the same. Well, I spent 5 years in my first F-18 squadron, which was atypical. It's typically about 3 years. I was here in San Diego. I was part of a squadron that deployed on Navy aircraft carriers, which is not the norm. There were only a few squadrons that did it. It was a highly desirable position to join those squadrons because the Navy generally does more interesting things when it comes to deployments. And so our goal every 2 years basically was to get the squadron ready to deploy on a 6-month deployment on an aircraft carrier. So that was kind of our mission.
Yeah.
And it's all about training and getting better at your tradecraft as an F-18 pilot.
Yeah.
Now there's a a ground job that you have. Every Marine officer has a ground job, and my initial job was in the operations department as a schedule writer, and so everything that's done every day is dictated by a flight schedule, a daily flight schedule, and so there is, that schedule is signed by the commanding officer that runs this 200 Marine unit organization. But these schedules are written by young officers called schedule writers. And so that was my first job. I then moved into maintenance. Like I said, I was in charge of 40 Marines. So there's the ground job aspect of it, which I can touch on in a second. But the flying aspect was it was not the same every day. We flew on the order of about 3 days a week. A flight is on the order of about an hour and a half. There's a ton of preparation that goes into it, typically a 1 hour brief. You then finish the brief where you discuss what you're going to do. You finish that about an hour before takeoff, and it takes then an hour to go and review the records for the airplane, put on your flight gear, and then go out to the airplane and start it up, taxi, and take off. So an hour brief, an hour prep, an hour and a half flight. You come back and you debrief between anywhere for an hour to maybe 3 hours at times. So it took up a large chunk of your day to go and fly.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Like I said, that was about 3 days a week. The flights were, different each time because there's a syllabus that you would go through as a young pilot, and then you learn more flight leadership skills. And there's really, there's no point where you're done training. You're always like working on the next thing. And even when you get to the pinnacle, you need to maintain those skills.
Yeah.
And so if you're not flying, a lot of times you're studying. And then when you're not studying, you're working on your ground job. And it's a balance kind of between those three different things. Depending on, who you were, what your family situation was, where you were in this kind of cycle to get ready to deploy, would then determine like how long you're at work. And when I first joined the operational squadron, I wasn't married. I was super gung-ho, like very motivated to succeed. And I spent very long hours at the squadron. It was a Monday to Friday. You typically take the weekends off, but I would spend 10 to 12 hours at work. And so quite long, days.
Yeah.
On the weekends, we would, maybe once a month, we would go on what's called a cross country, and we would go and fly during the weekends. And it was much more just focused on like flying as much as you can, minimizing the brief and the turnaround time, and just getting comfortable in the airplane. And as a single guy, I like to do that a lot. And we would, maybe go and spend the weekend in Phoenix or in Las Vegas, or Tucson or something like that, go and have fun as well, and then fly during the day. And that was,
Very cool.
a great way to get comfortable in the airplane, have fun. So that was a large part of the day-to-day. When you are, when you're studying, you're in a classified space, you're typically studying, secret materials, learning tactics and procedures. And then, like I said, when you're doing your day job, your ground job, as a schedule writer, you're, sitting at a desk next to a computer, dealing with balancing resources, people, airplanes, airspace, other factors to come up with this very complex, synergy of kind of resource management. As a division officer, then I was dealing with a lot of like personal problems with these young Marines, their training, managing their training, making sure that that they were set up for success. So it's the ground jobs definitely was a range of different tasks.
Yeah.
So that was kind of ops normal, if you will, back at like home station. And then as you got ready to deploy, there was a series of workups, what it was called in the case of deploying on an aircraft carrier. These workups would take place over 6 months on and off. You'd spend some time at home field, and then other times away. And we spent a lot of time in Fallon, Nevada, and a lot of time on the aircraft carrier. And when we would go to other places to train and join other organizations to get ready as a larger organization to deploy overseas. Still a lot of that three balancing of like either flying, studying, or doing your ground job, albeit probably more focused on the studying and flying piece. Maybe your ground job would take a little bit of a backseat. You probably fly more on those in these workups. Those were fairly high paced when you execute a workup somewhere, and then on the carrier, there's days off, but the days all kind of blend together.
I bet.
There's no weekends. There's there were days off, admittedly, but one day is very similar to the next. You live 200 feet from where you eat, 200 feet from where you work.
Yeah.
And so it is very efficient, if you will, in terms of what you're doing each day.
What's it like on the aircraft carrier when you're deploying? How do you maintain physical fitness? Do you have time off? Are you free to roam kind of wherever you want? Or you just sit in your office? Like, how does all that work?
Yeah, there's definitely not a claustrophobia, but you feel a bit confined.
I bet.
Admittedly, if you're not careful, you could like not see daylight, not see sunlight for days at a time. Obviously, if you're flying, you're up on the flight deck and you're getting outside, which made it nice. But there were times, for example, in various, like either the weather or maybe the airplanes weren't doing well maintenance wise or whatever restriction where you wouldn't fly for a few days. And so you needed to like get out.
Yeah.
Otherwise you feel a little bit cooped up.
And so is there like an allotted time that you're like, okay, you can go up on the flight deck and get out?
No, I mean, you could go up there if there were like flight operations going on, you'd have to go up with like the proper like equipment, like hearing protection.
Yeah.
If you were ever to go out at night, you would need to wear what's called a float coat. Like if you went overboard,
right? Yeah,
you'd be in trouble.
Yeah,
like people wouldn't see you,
right?
And you'd be done. So you'd have to go out with a float coat, which is basically like a life preserver plus a light.
Yeah, like a strobe.
A strobe light. Yeah. But during the daytime, you could go up there without a float coat. Do you ask about like the physical exercise piece of it? There's a number of gyms.
Wow.
And interestingly, I would say based on the fact that like that is your sole focus, like there's no distractions from like a home perspective. A lot of folks actually get in quite good shape.
I bet.
Some folks, because the food is pretty good on the carrier. Others maybe put on weight because they're just maybe not as focused and they're just, eating all the time or something like that. But there's definitely a risk of like some mental health challenges on the carrier. You got to be careful. Set up a personal schedule. Sleep is a bit challenging because it's noisy. It's not.
The lights are always on.
Well, I mean, in our staterooms where you sleep, you could turn the lights off.
Yeah.
But so I deployed twice in that first tour. In both cases, the first stateroom I was with 7 other pilots, so it's a little bit like a dorm room. The second one, it was just 2 of us, so it was a little bit quieter in that sense. But in both cases, the stateroom is directly below the flight deck.
Oh,
so
wow.
On top of me are aircraft taxiing, with like jet engines running.
Yeah.
Or interestingly, the chains that you tie down the aircraft with.
You can hear
when those are moved around the deck, it's very noisy, the metal on metal on the flight deck. And a lot of time when the sailors or Marines are moving chains around and it takes, 9 chains to tie down an airplane, they're moving these things around by dragging them and dragging a bunch of heavy metal chains across. A metal flight deck is very noisy. And so long story short, sleep is hard to come by, and that is a challenge.
Yeah.
That's why you got to be disciplined about like forcing yourself to good sleep habits. But the sleep quality is not awesome.
Right. What advice do you have for current aviators? On the younger side, they're still at the beginning of their career. You've seen a full career now. What advice do you have for them if they want to aspire, if they want to move up to F-35s? or take on more leadership? What advice would you have for them if they're listening?
So, interestingly, I found since I've left the Marine Corps, a very, very satisfying to connect with young men and women who are aspiring to go in the military or maybe have started the flight school path and provide some of that mentorship. So I've had a number of these conversations in the last year or two.
Mm-hmm.
And so it guys, it depends on where you are in that stage of training.
Yeah.
I think it's a different conversation, obviously, if you're not quite sure military aviation is for you compared to the individual who is maybe about to, select jets versus helicopters versus C-130s, or they're in jets and they really want to fly F-35s.
Yeah.
It's obviously a different conversation. Interestingly, the Marine Corps is moving on the jet side of the house to all F-35s.
Yeah, I heard.
So everybody who is getting selected for jets knows precisely what airplane they're going to fly. In my case, when I selected for jets, there was F-18s, Harriers, and Prowlers, and it generally went in that order in terms of preference. The strongest jet students ended up flying F-18s. The ones who didn't do as well ended up in Prowlers. The Harrier was kind of in the middle.
I thought the Harrier was the coolest thing ever.
So, I mean, it is a fascinating aircraft. I never flew it, but I know a number of those pilots. I will say it's very cool to have hovered in the F-35B. It's a fascinating experience.
Oh, man. So cool. So wild.
But the F-18, I definitely, and especially deploying, like I said, with the Navy, was an amazing experience. I would not have changed that. And it was, I think, the right call. Going back to some of the skills, I think, are the keys to success. I think if you're in flight school, staying disciplined, avoiding distractions, finding what works for you as a key to success. Like I said, for me, I found teaching was a great way to help me learn. Everybody learns differently. Some it's visual, some it's orally.
There are three big stages to learning, right? There's learning the skill, doing the skill, and then teaching the skill, right?
Sure.
You're not a master until you're able to teach it.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And the learning piece, right? There's people have different like visual and oral mediums that they take to. And I think figuring that out early on is critical. The compartmentalization to the best of your ability, I think, is really important as well. I think for those who are early on in the process, one of the critical things to make sure that you have sorted out in your brain is to make sure that you really want to do it, because it is very difficult. It's very time demanding. And if you can't commit to it, you're either going to fail or you're going to fall short of your goals.
Yeah.
And so for me, I knew very early on, like, this is what I really want to do. And I really want to get jets. And then I had like success upon success upon success. And it was like, my initial goal was to get jets. And then I was like, as I got to that point, I was the top of my class, like class after class. It was then, all right, I want F-18s. I want F-18s that deploy in aircraft carriers. I want to transition to F-35. Each one of these things was a very like rigorous selection process.
Right.
And I would not have had nearly the success I did if the drive wasn't there.
Yeah.
And so I think folks need to be very honest with themselves to make sure that it's their internal drive that wants to do this and not somebody else pressuring them. For example, parents or some other role model, or, if you're just attracted to like the image. And the stigma of the, what one thinks a military aviator might be like, then that's probably not the right motivation.
Especially when you consider how little time you're actually spending in the cockpit, right? It's a lot of the time is spent prepping and doing all the work.
No, for sure. I mean, I will say it definitely, yes, it is limited time, but it made it all, like, it makes all the preparation worthwhile.
Oh, of course.
It was, incredibly rewarding and a lot of fun. So I think that's a big key to success is the internal motivation part of it.
What does retirement look like for an aviator? You're obviously, you come out, you've got an amazing amount of experience with managing people, managing stressful situations, logistics. You're now proven to yourself that you're disciplined. Mentally, you're no slouch either, right? Because you've been able to go through officer training and through all these selections. So I can imagine you come out of retirement, that's not it for your career, and the world is probably your oyster at that point. So what path did you take? And what path do a lot of aviators take after retirement?
Well, I think it's the term retirement is almost a misnomer. That is the government term, if you will,
right.
for a 20-year career, or the ability to get out at 20 and beyond, which is what I did. I think it's probably more appropriate to call it like a transition, because I'm certainly not retired per se, but it is technically called a retirement because it obviously has differences in terms of the pension and benefits aspect of it. So as you mentioned, yes, I did spend 20 years and retired out of the military. In my case now, I'm with Lockheed Martin, and I've been there for a little over 2 years. Still teaching young Marine pilots coming out of flight school how to fly the F-35, in this case in the simulator, not in the airplane. And now, I'm in charge of the organization here in San Diego that runs that facility. There's about 55 of us on the team that I am in charge of and oversee, and so it's a combination of teaching, but also a fair bit of like the management of that team as well. So I guess a lot of different a lot of different ways to answer that question. One, the military aviation does indeed give you a ton of skills to then transition and do any number of things. I would say the percentage choice for primarily jet aviation is to go in the airlines. The next most common is to stay somewhere within the defense contracting space, or typically around aviation, which is where I am. And either in the simulator space or with defense organizations that are somehow involved in aviation. So a lot of folks end up down that path. But then there are a lot who just completely just cut it away and do something else. A lot of folks end up going back to school. In my case, I went and got my MBA, which a lot of others have done to branch out as a great transition academic path.
Does the Marine Corps help pay for that within a certain period after your retirement?
In my case, the VA covered that education. There's the GI Bill, which is a common term. I did not use the GI Bill. There are other programs besides the GI Bill. One's called the VRNE, which is the program that I took. The GI Bill is available for your spouse and for your family.
Understood.
So in my case, my wife ended up using my GI Bill while I was still active duty to get her MBA. The case of VRNE that I used is just for the service member. So without going into too much detail, that is the path. So my school was covered by the VA, which was a huge benefit. So like I said, school is another big path or a helpful like transition that folks will take. But I guess to get after your question, the skills, you're right. The skills are myriad that you pick up in the military, whether it's 6 or 8 years in the military, or you do full 20, or you stay in for 30 or beyond. The leadership skills, the management, you're right, the logistics, just the organizational capability is skills that a lot of folks in other industries just don't pick up along the way. And so a lot of those skills are very transferable and very attractive to employers.
And now in the meantime, you're, while you're now employed, you're getting paid out a pension from your time in the services as well.
Yeah. So, on the compensation side of the house, for those that are curious, it's fixed. It's published. It's based on your rank. There's no discrepancies. There's no different disparity among a specific rank. Now, there are some nuances to it. For example, as an aviator, you collect flight pay, which is an allowance that is not insignificant. Probably the biggest factor is a housing allowance. that interestingly, I didn't quite realize this when I was in the military, but in a place like San Diego, for example, that has a higher cost of living, the government compensates you for that higher cost of living. And so you live in a more attractive area.
Yeah.
Interestingly, you get paid more.
Yeah.
Which is obviously opposite to a degree from kind of corporate or from the rest of industry, where it's a supply and demand, where
Right.
just because you have higher cost of living doesn't necessarily equate to getting paid more. Like those are the benefits, right, of living in Southern California, for example. You may not get compensated as much.
Yeah.
So that is a nice aspect of the military. Then in my case, after leaving under a retirement, you then qualify for a pension, and I get paid a portion of my previous pay for the rest of my life, which is a great benefit.
That's amazing.
That is changing with the government. I don't have the exact specifics. In the military, they're taking on more of a 401k type mindset as opposed to the fixed pension path to provide a compensation long term that's more comparable to what's done in the rest of civilian industries. But that is, in my case, one of the benefits of staying into the 20-year mark is that.
I don't think a lot of people realize that. I don't think people realize that after your military career, you can have a whole nother career outside of that. You're, not only are you receiving VA benefits, but you're also getting a pension paid out, right? At the same time. I think some people may not be attracted to a life of service because they think, okay, pay may not be that great or this and that. But if you think of your life in terms of this long career over 30, 40 years, it's great.
Yeah.
It's really,
you bet.
really lucrative.
No, that's, it's funny. That's why I almost say leaving after 20 as a retirement is very much a misnomer.
Yeah, it's a transition.
You typically enter at 22, you retire at 42, you've got an additional 20-year career ahead of you potentially. And so that is effectively what I am embarking upon as the second chapter of my career.
Are you physically beat up from, decades in the cockpit? Like, I can imagine hearing must be a challenge. People that have ejected, I think, end up quite a bit shorter than what they did before. Like, how are you? Physically, how are you?
There's definitely like a physical toll for sure.
But you're in great shape still. Like, you're still capable, able-bodied.
There's the VA disability process is a full hour-long discussion separately.
We won't touch that.
And there's a lot of different ways to approach it. It works in terms of percentages. You could be 100% disabled, 0% disabled. Interesting. Like, for example, you see a handicap license plate. It says DV is disabled veteran.
Yeah.
That individual is 100% disabled.
Right.
And not all of them are obviously like, it's not visually significant. A lot of it's, PTSD now, which so the mental health piece is a big one that is not typically visible. In my case, as an aviator, a lot of folks, yes, hearing is definitely a thing. I suffer from a bit of like ringing in my ears, tinnitus. So I have lost some of my hearing, although thankfully I entered the military with kind of above average hearing, and now that's great. Average.
I'm glad something about you is average now. Duncan.
So that has been that's an aspect of it. There are some neck and back things that are just the cockpit and pulling G's that are problematic. I have some other musculoskeletal ailments that, so interestingly, provided you are, in the line of duty, so not like, drunk or doing something stupid, you get injured, even if you're not at work, you are still like part of the military. So if you were to go and like, bust your knee, which, for example, some friends get a knee replacement that is not related to your time in the cockpit, for example, that still counts towards your VA disability.
Interesting.
Different ways you could view that. It's like I said, there's a lot of different opinions on how that is done. There is very much like the take care of, you aspect there, because a lot of the aspects of the military are challenging, and the government takes care of you in a lot of ways and takes advantage of you in other ways. And so I think it's appropriate balance.
For sure.
Yeah. So I have a number of, I don't know, maybe there's like a dozen things in my record, that, have led to a disability rating of mine that at certain levels has well, at all levels has a financial compensation associated with it.
Yeah. But you're still able to do what you want to in life. You're not hamstrung necessarily. You're still out there rock climbing. And
I could have gone down the airline path. I could have continued to fly.
That's great.
As a profession. I chose not to. I think, some of the disabilities might have made it a little bit more challenging, not quite as comfortable. But nothing prevents me from flying or the physical activities, as you mentioned, that I do.
What 20 years of this, what was your favorite part of the job?
Certainly everything in the cockpit.
Yeah.
Granted, a lot of the most gratifying things I did were, in service of others. And so leading teams of others was very gratifying.
Yeah.
So, there's a difference between joy and happiness, I would say.
For sure.
Some things brought joy and satisfaction and fulfillment. Other things were exhilarating and a lot of fun. And so
cool.
it's tough to fully answer that. I would say on the fun and exhilarating, and those are the fun stories.
Yeah.
Were certainly, times in the cockpit. I spent 2.5 years on an exchange tour in Australia.
Right.
And we did some things flying over there that just incredible. They pushed the boundaries a little bit over there with, safely, but they pushed the boundaries, and that was incredible. Some of the things I did on some combat deployments overseas were pretty amazing, to spend years training and then to be able to actually put it into practice at the highest level is very gratifying as well. I always equate it to high school football. In my case, you go through, a month of painful double days,
right,
and then a lot of practice, and you get to exercise what you practiced in the game, right? That's the exercise, or the pinnacle of exercising what you practiced in the military. It could be years of training before you actually get to go and do something. And, sadly, some folks never do it. I have a number of friends who never went to combat. They spent 20 years in the military. They deployed overseas in preparation for something bad to happen, and they never got to exercise it. And I think there's a little bit of that hole in their satisfaction for them. I was thankfully we went overseas and we supported Marines and Army soldiers on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, and those missions were very, very satisfying.
Yeah.
But some of the most fun, operating around the aircraft carrier, landing on the aircraft carrier, was amazing. I would say probably to put it succinctly, not one specific event, but you get, initially it's very difficult. It's terrifying to land on the carrier the first time, but over time you get more and more comfortable with it.
Yeah.
To the point where it becomes almost second nature, and then you start pushing yourself and making it more difficult to actually have more fun.
Oh,
and so,
amazing.
Initially you come in to land on the carrier at 350 knots, and then you execute a break into the landing pattern. And this is just as an example. And eventually you get better and better, and it's a little bit of a contest between your buddies to come in faster and faster and lower and lower. And it's out at sea. It's an air show every time. There's no rules. The FAA is not watching, so you can do whatever you want, so long as you're not breaking the airplane or yourself or the carrier.
Yeah.
And so we got to the point at the end of my second deployment where we got so good at it, you would come in and you would push the airplane right up into the limits for fun, and then be able to safely land on the carrier, get out of the cockpit, know that, all right, that was fun. I did my best. I pushed it as hard as I could.
And I beat my buddies.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
They're buying,
you won the contest.
They're buying me a beer.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Duncan, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time now. And
My pleasure.
good luck with this next career of yours.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you very much.
You bet.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thanks, Duncan.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Duncan as much as I did. I love how he said the most important part of pursuing a career in aviation is making sure you do it for the right reasons, that the motivation has to come from within. It was so interesting to hear how the aviation school actually looks for people that are willing to break the rules a bit and display a certain level of controlled aggression. I also had no idea that if you do it right, you can have multiple off-ramps before committing to a career in the military, so Duncan was guaranteed a spot in flight school before he signed up. I loved hearing how you can learn to compartmentalize fear in stressful situations and then become so confident in your abilities that you start pushing your limits to become even better. It's also interesting to hear how, even at the pinnacle of his career, Duncan was still studying, still learning, and unwilling to settle. Oh, and I spoke to Duncan afterwards about his thoughts on how unmanned aircraft will change the course of military aviation in the future, and he assured me that there will continue to be a strong demand for fighter pilots for a long time, so keep that dream alive. If you enjoyed this podcast, give us a like and follow. You can also check out our website at htbpod.com to see a database of jobs we've interviewed for already. And if you feel like you have an interesting career and want to tell your own story on our podcast, just go to htbpod.com and submit the form. Thanks again, and see you next week.